good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. Once again, it's great in the midst. Now, where I'm coming from, there's snow. I'm not sure where you're at, but of course we're up here, and I think a lot of people up here are liking to wear masks because it's so cold outside, but we're in a different world. But it's great to be able to join you, to relax for a bit, and to listen to how the Lord continues to work in people's lives. And I've noticed over the years that on the one hand, though the way God works in people's lives can be similar from one guest to the next, it's also amazing the uniqueness of our individual situations and our individual lives to see the same fingerprints of the Holy Spirit, but in different ways. And my hope is always that these stories are always an encouragement to you, or an encouragement to you as you pray for someone else in your life who's either departed from the faith or is struggling to maybe come home. Well, our hope is that these stories are encouragement to you, especially during this difficult time. So once again, welcome back. Our guests tonight are Deacon Charlie and Jess Echeverry. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Welcome to The Journey Home.
Thank you, Marcus.
Both
Great to be here.
Thank you for having
Welcome
us.
to The Journey Home. Well, I'm anxious to hear your story. Now, do I have it right? It's kind of your story mostly, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Are you a lifelonger?
I disagree.
I was born into the Catholic faith, so I'm a revert to the faith as well.
Okay,
and
well,
I
then
think
it's a little bit of both.
The
then.
conversion
It
and
is.
reversion are definitely connected, but
Okay, well,
but
let me back off.
The ladies first.
You guys decide how to start. So, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was definitely baptized by two Christian parents when I was young, but my parents divorced before I was a year old, so there was brokenness in the family.
Yeah.
And they fell away from their faith lives. And so I grew up in a home that we didn't pray, we didn't go to church, we didn't talk about God. I did have a very close uncle who his family, Protestants, and still beautiful Protestants today, and full of faith. My exposure to God and Jesus Christ and the Bible and religion was when I was with their family, with hanging out with my cousins, and they would have church, camping trips, and that's where I would be exposed to who God was and Jesus. So lots of great memories there.
When you were young, if you picture your view of the world that you had as a young person, was God in there somewhere, or was he just something that somebody else did, or for you? Was God in there somewhere, do you think?
Yeah, he was definitely on the outside of where I was. I knew he existed because I heard people that I trusted and loved talk about him and express their love for him. But in my experiences growing up, it didn't make sense to me that he would be so good and exist based on the things that I was experiencing.
That was, audience, did you hear what you just said? That is a powerful witness to the fact that you said, I knew he existed because people I trusted talked about him. Did you hear that?
It's very important. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Called a witness.
I mean, that little simple statement is powerful. A young girl who had no religion knew he existed because people I trusted talked about him.
Yes.
Mea culpa.
Amen.
All right.
Yes.
Especially your grandma.
Yes, my Nana, my father's mother, I was very close with her. She was kind of my go-to person growing up and going through all the experiences that I did go through. She was raised Catholic. She's an Italian immigrant to the United States, and she would pray her rosary, but she fell away from the church as she got older and being in the U.S. But she was a very powerful force as far as showing me God, which really cemented in me that I knew God existed.
Yeah.
I just was kind of upset at him for, if he was this good and gracious God, why was I going through so much pain and turmoil?
All right. Well, that's almost the unasked question that might be there festering in a young person, because who do you talk to about that if that question is there,
Right.
So it may just kind of eat away at a young person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The information says that you're a former New Ager. Did that start young?
Skipping ahead.
No, yeah.
So I don't want to skip ahead. I don't want to skip ahead yet. No.
Actually, so, when I was a young girl, I had these influences from my uncle and my Nana, who then passed away. And so, again, I knew God existed, but I had no relationship with him, nor did I want a relationship with him.
Okay.
Again, there were brokenness in my family, step-parents and remarriages and those types of things. As a child, I was in a vulnerable situation. I experienced child molestation and rape, and that deformed me. And, I was young, I was 12, that kind of sent me on this path of deformation. I began to rebel and just kind of acting out, which my parents had no idea what was going on with me. And so they just thought I was just, this rebellious kid. And so there was a lot of struggle there in the household. So by 14, I was running away and trying to get out of the house. And then by 16, I had become pregnant and ended up being homeless at that age. So,
Now, again, our guests are Deacon, Charlie, and Jess Echeverry. Explain to the audience becoming homeless at 16, because my guess is an awful lot of folk could, how could that? I mean, you got parents, even though they're broken, you know what I'm saying? You got uncles, and how could that happen to a young 16, help them feel.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Well, look, the truth is that abortion is legal in our country. And the truth is that my parents, in their own woundedness generationally, they did the best job that they could, and they love me tremendously. But they made decisions based on their own brokenness and woundedness, and that affected me. So I didn't have the support of my family at the time, and I didn't know where else to turn. So my boyfriend at the time, this was in high school, he befriended a woman on a city bus coming home from work one day and found a room to rent for me. And it ended up being in a very low-income neighborhood and what turned out to be a crack and prostitution house. And so that's where I was in my early pregnancy, experiencing, what happens in that environment, which I now describe as just pure hell. It is evil, that environment. And again, going back to my relationship with God, how can I see a good and gracious God when I am here now pregnant, feeling unsupported and in a house of prostitution and drug use and just all kinds of sin and evil? I couldn't. I didn't see him as loving me, and I didn't want him because of what I was experiencing. I did get to a breaking point in that house where I just couldn't take it anymore. I would have rather been on the street than in there. And my mom rescued me from there. I called her, and she came immediately, and she found a Christian home for unwed mothers for me. And now this introduces me to God again, because now it's a Christian home. And this was run by a Protestant church in the area. And the model for the home was a house mother and a house father, and the young women there, usually teenagers, who are pregnant. And it was a beautiful home. It was like they took this mansion and they turned it into a community home for all of us. So the experience of being in this big home was amazing. And the house mom was just so beautiful. My memories of her was that she was just this loving, doting mother over us, sitting by the fire, knitting, like literally what you see in movies or I read in a book. And I just felt a lot of comfort. And they would speak about God. And as a matter of fact, we had to go to church on Sundays with them. And so I was participating, but my heart wasn't open. I still felt like the situation I was in wasn't my choice. I didn't want to be in that situation, and I still kind of blamed God for that, and didn't see him in there. But it was a beautiful experience. I gave birth to my first child at 16.
Wow.
And a boy. And the house that I lived in, this was in the late 80s, early 90s, they didn't have resources for girls who wanted to keep their children. And so it was adoption. So if you're there, you're agreeing to place your baby up for adoption. And so I did agree to that, and I gave birth to him and spent my time in the hospital with him. And Thank you. and left the hospital without him.
Wow.
Again, I'm really upset that, any good and gracious God could allow me to experience that type of pain and separation. But it was what was in the plan that I had to follow, and so I followed it. And I fell into a very deep depression at the home, and I ended up speaking to my son's father, and his family wanted to take care of the child because I couldn't take care of the child. And we agreed that we would fight to get him back. Well, the adoption never went through the court, so all we had to do was just void out our paperwork and he would be returned to us. And there he was. So a few weeks after I had him, there he was in front of me. And I just didn't have the support that I needed. So I took him over to his father's family's home, and I spent the whole day with him as his mom. And then at around 11 p.m., I knew it was time to go, and I didn't have anywhere to go. So that was the first night that I spent on the beach. That's where I went.
Wait a second. So you left the baby with his family?
Yes.
And walked out the door?
I did.
To the beach?
Yes.
Wow.
And I made my place in the sand there, and I just remember just that waiting for the first light, the sunrise, because that's how I knew I'm going to be safe. If I could just get through this night, then I'll figure out something the next day. So that was the beginning of my roughly 4 years in and out of friends' homes, even back with my mom, a few times, experiencing homelessness.
Our guests are again Deacon Charlie and Jess Echeverry. This might seem like a strange question, but I don't think I've always asked it. On the one hand, I asked whether you knew God growing up. Was there any mention of the devil? Did you grow up at all? There's one thing about, does God care? Is God there? But any sense at all that some of these thoughts are probably not coming from a great source?
Mm-hmm.
It's a great question.
It's a great question, and the answer would be no. I thought everything that was happening was from God. Yeah.
Again, that reminds me of that great Paul Harvey lecture about what would I do if I was the devil.
Yeah.
And the first thing is I convince the world I don't exist. If you don't know the devil can be there, putting all kinds of stuff into your life, doing it to you, well, then it must be God.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
So 4 years out there.
4 years out there, 2 years in at 18, I became pregnant again. And considering how unsuccessful the first pregnancy was, I was highly influenced to have an abortion. And needless to say, I just went numb. Knowing about the devil now and looking back, he was absolutely in my ear. Everything I heard in my head was definitely him. What kind of mother can you be? You've already left one child on the street. All of these evil thoughts convincing me that the best thing for me to do is to have an abortion. And I did.
Wow.
I did.
Was it easy for you, but was it an easy process? In other words, had the system made it an easy choice?
The system made it very easy, actually. It made it very easy. My most vivid memory is sitting in the recovery room. The recovery room is just a room full of recliners where they give you crackers and apple juice, and there's a TV blaring, and you're just in a room full of other women coming out of the twilight drug that they've given you. And I just remember looking around and feeling a deep sadness and a heaviness. It was definitely something that I didn't want to do, but convinced myself that needed to be done. And then I moved on by basically saying, I'm never going to speak of this again. This didn't happen. I'm going to take it and I'm going to shove it all the way down so I don't have to think about it or deal with it. And I started out the rest of my life convincing myself that this just didn't happen. I buried it.
You think that's a common thought?
Oh, very common.
Okay, I mean, I don't.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Very common. Yeah.
We now do a bit of work with post-abortive women, couples, and we know that that's the case. And in fact, so much so that, women, especially the way that society not only accepts, but in some cases encourages the idea of abortion, that a lot of women who have this sense inside can't even share it. They can't even be honest about how they feel having gone through this. And it's a terrible weight, just that concept alone. So it's definitely pervasive from what we've seen.
Yeah, hey, just get over it. Put it behind you, move on. A brand new life. There you
That's right. You're going to start over. Well, it's a disenfranchised grief. It's a grief that the world doesn't want to hear. And I quickly learned that. You quickly realize that. There's nobody out there, if I said this really hurts, to support me. So, and I think that's what almost all, I don't want to say all, but almost all women feel on some level or another. I put it behind me, as so I thought, and again, being still on and off homelessness, being out on the street and experiencing that, I fell into a really deep depression. And at 19, I attempted suicide, and then again at 20. And by the time I was 21, I was pregnant again. And so by 21, I managed to move in with an abusive boyfriend in order to have some type of stability now that I was pregnant. But I ended up having to get a restraining order and having him taken from the apartment due to the abuse that I was suffering from. Being pregnant and having a black eye isn't anything that feels good, or looks good to, when you're trying to go to work. But it was my first experience with social services. I went on welfare. I was now receiving this aid. I was in my own apartment. And truth be told, it was the first time I felt stable and independent in my life. So here I was, 21, third pregnancy, in my own place, have some type of support, albeit from the government, and feeling like I'm on top of the world. This was my on top of the world.
Again, that whispering. Now you look back and you know where that whispering was coming from. But
That's right.
On the one hand, the devil says, "Yeah, put it behind you, move on." And then after you move on, he just laughs.
Yeah.
Just laughs because all the other stuff that comes. And, and of course, if God's in that thought pattern at all in you at the point in time, from what you said, you're blaming him for all this.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, if it wasn't blame, it was just non-thought.
Okay.
He just wasn't even a part of it. He wasn't a part of what was going on. In my worst moments, I probably did go, how could you let this happen? In my lowest, worst interior moments. But for the majority of it is he was a part of other people's lives. He wasn't a part of mine, and nor did I want him to be a part of mine. But by 21, I give birth to my third child, a daughter, and I'm dirt poor. I come home with her in a taxi with a car seat that one of the Women's Guild from the hospital groups donates for poor moms who don't have enough money for a car seat. So I came home with my daughter in a donated car seat in a taxi and started to now have, the life that I wanted to have. And then very, very shortly after that, I met Deacon Charlie.
All right. So, but at this point, there's no faith, no church, no nothing.
No,
just you
nothing.
living in a room. And
Nothing.
Working?
Yes, working, bartending.
Okay. All right.
When we initially met, she was a receptionist at an office, and I was a aspiring office equipment salesman. So I came in. She was the gatekeeper, trying to keep me from the decision makers, and that's actually how we met. But yeah, Marcus, our very Dickensian in the sense that very different kind of Tale of Two Cities backgrounds. I was born into the faith. I was born a Catholic, very traditional in a sense, Latino Catholic family. My family was Colombian immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. And I grew up, I was born in California, but I came up by way of a number of different places because my dad was in charge of the Latin American and Caribbean part of a bank. And so very soon after I was 2 years old, in LA, we moved to Mexico City. And then after Mexico City to Buenos Aires, where our Holy Father is from. And then after Buenos Aires to Venezuela, to Caracas, when you could live there. Not so much anymore. And then after Venezuela to the U.S. Virgin Islands. I lived in St. Thomas for a number of years, and then eventually moved to Florida right around my middle school, high school age. And that's how I got there. My experience with the faith was one that it was deeply imbued, but because I grew up in these cultures where Catholicism in some respects is in the same breath as, the kind of food you'll have, right? So in my household, it was La Iglesia, arepas, and coffee, right? It was so common to have the church represented in that way that the church oftentimes could become invisible. The faith could become invisible. And the one thing that I always give a lot of thanks to God is coming up in this country, despite our challenges with the faith, and despite that we may actually be living in a bit of a post-Christian moment, you have to choose your faith here. And that was something very new to me that I had to, when I moved back to the States, had to pick to be Christian. Whereas coming up in these countries and being Latino myself, it was part of the package. When she and I met, I was beginning to drift, let's say, from the faith, if anything. I was living on my own. I had started a successful career in sales, making good money, doing all the things that I'd watched my dad do, be a good executive, kind of do all that stuff. And to me, God sort of receded into the background. It was only when I was challenged about my faith, and thank God that he threw some of those obstacles in front of me, that I would claw back and say, well, this is why I believe this. It was those moments where we're given the opportunity to sort of explain, our faith. But I was drifting, if anything, when she and I first met. And of course, there was no reason on earth why we should be together. None. I mean, if anything, her background, which I found out in sort of bits, right, in tranches. And this is something very common with people who have now working with folks who've had Jess's background. A very common thing is that, when you work with folks and you meet them for the first time, they won't tell you everything at the same time because they're afraid you're going to run away.
Or they'll lie.
Or they'll just say some other thing, right? So I learned all of these things in sort of tranches, in batches, over a period of maybe a year or so of getting to know her. And plenty of times that I felt like running for the hills. Plenty of times. And to be honest, it was the advice of a good friend who maybe had the reputation of not being the guy who would give you good advice. But sometimes the Holy Spirit inspires, right? He uses every tool. He's a frugal God, and so he'll use everything at his disposal. But the advice of this friend, and when I talked to him about her, he said, well, if the only reason that you wouldn't be with her is because she's got a kid, then that seems to me like a really bad idea, like a really bad reason. And something about him saying that just really struck a chord with me, because of my upbringing, because of the importance of family and Latino households and all of this. And I said, well, you're right. If that's the only reason, that's kind of a terrible reason. And so, we continued to date and obviously our relationship blossomed and, God kind of did that baton handoff where I think she maybe leaned a little bit on my foundation in order to sort of heal. And then now, obviously, in our marriage, I joke with her that now I'm kind of reaching back and trying to deal with whatever things I have to deal with now that she's in a very good place. But
so during that dating relationship, did God come into the equation at all?
I think
you were falling away, so it really was important to bring it in.
In the very early days, very little. It wasn't only. It was when we moved to California, which was also a very important part, I think, of your healing.
Yes.
Was just getting some distance geographically from the things that were going on in South Florida, where all of this happened. It was then, and we began to. I was raising her daughter Vanessa, who I adopted legally as my daughter. And putting her in school was a big moment. And I said, we must have her go to Catholic school. Now, if you would have asked me why, I wouldn't have known the answer to that. But it was in those more initial, life stage moments that the faith began to be more important to me.
And I was mesmerized by him. I had never met anybody like him before. He was this.
I had hair at the time.
He was this, successful executive, my age, and self-sufficient, and he drove a nice BMW, and it was this. People with trauma usually associate the other people in their lives are usually people with trauma, And so you're in this type of circle where you don't even realize that the life that you've lived and the people you're surrounded by are suffering, and you're in that trauma. You can't see outside of it. So God introduced him into my life and just really broke through that kind of trauma barrier to allow me to see something different. I saw something so different in him than I'd ever experienced, and I was just captivated. I was just like, I want to be with you wherever you go and whatever you do. I don't care what it takes. And so when we moved to California, and again with our daughter, he basically had 2 non-negotiables in our relationship. And again, he couldn't explain why, but this was just part of his foundation and coming back up. It's, our daughter, we need to get married in the church, and our children need to have a Catholic education. So now for me, it was like, okay, whatever. Like, you can give me the whole list. I'll check every single box, right? So he became someone new that I trusted, whom I loved. And I only really, truly felt that in my life with my Nana. And so he became my new healthy relationship. And so I was willing to go wherever he wanted to go, do whatever. I would always tell him, he was like, well, I'm going to find this nice house and we're going to have this. And I was like, I'll live in the car with you. Like, it doesn't matter. He's like, yeah, I know you will, but we really need a nice house. I didn't know she was serious because she had lived in a car. So,
had to step up from some of
right?
it.
Right, exactly.
But
especially a BMW. But
I know, it didn't hurt. But the way I explain it is, you have my life and its traumas and its experiences. And the entirety is not all traumas and experiences. I have my sprinkles of hope and joy in there. But then you have his life, and what happened in our relationship, and then once we got married, was that I was able to see the truth in the experiences that I had experienced. And that started to create a struggle in me.
All right. Well, maybe that's a good place to pause. So at this point, we're pausing with you. Married in the church?
In the church.
Married in the church.
Did you have to get instruction? I mean, we'll talk about that after the break,
Sure.
whether you did. Did you get any introduction to as you became Catholic? Of course
Sure.
Let's talk about that. Come back in a moment. As we take a break, I do want to remind you of our website, chnetwork.org. That's the website for the Coming Home Network International, which is my main job. And if you go to that website, you'll find out lots of conversion stories and resources and an online community, especially possibly if you happen to turn on this program and you've got some issues that we're talking about tonight. We'd love to hear from you. Do what we can to help your heart open to our good Lord Jesus Christ. See you in a moment. All right, welcome back to the Journey Home. I'm your host, Marcus Grodi, and our guests are Deacon Charlie and Jess Echeverry. We paused because you'd moved to California, you got married in church, your daughter is going to attend Catholic school because you said that's the way it is. But my question was, for the first time in your life, did you get some formation here? Because I didn't think you just got married in the church without something.
Right. No, I mean, we did.
At our retreat weekend.
We had, yes, we went to Engaged Encounter and had a retreat weekend. And that was the first time I'd ever experienced anything like that. So where I am now is, this church is different than any of my experiences. But again, I associated the church with him, and I trusted and loved him. So I was all in. And the retreat weekend was beautiful. I had an amazing experience. First time I've ever done a retreat or had any experience like that. And it was beautiful. It was definitely, it changed something in my heart. It definitely opened me up a little bit more to the possibility that God is good. But I wasn't convinced. I was still just doing it to keep him around. Right. So
it was a learning experience for me too. I mean, I think, like I said, I grew up in this very culturally Catholic environment, but the instruction and some of the things that we did over the course of that preparation time were maybe the first time that I had really, at least in my adult life, remembered doing any of that. Now, again, I'm doing it almost because I feel a sense of being duty bound to get married in the church, and there's all of this very cultural thing that's driving me. So I'm not, these haven't connected yet in terms of why we're doing this. But I remember being instructed in that. Father Paul actually is the person who did we had a renewal of vows 10 years later.
10 or 10 years, yeah.
And we recontacted the then pastor of a different parish, but he, he officiated that as well. And so there was definitely instruction for me as well. And then obviously the grace of the sacrament itself, which looking back to me was just what opened up the aperture to all this. It doesn't happen immediately. It's not like a thunderclap, but if you look back, it coincides.
Definitely. And also now our daughter's going to Catholic school. We weren't attending Mass on a regular basis. It was very sporadic. You can call us Easter and Christmas Catholics. And whatever obligation through the school, we had to be at the church or attend Mass. But when our daughter was in first grade, she came home with a box. It was a project she did in school. And it was a prayer box, and she had designed it. She, in the class, they were supposed to take it home, and that could be their own little prayer space in their rooms. And so she kind of quickly went into her room and closed the door, like she was still working on it. It wasn't finished. And so I knocked on the door, and she was like, "Mom, I need a picture of Jesus on the cross." And she was like, "Will you print one out for me?" I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll go do that." And so I printed one out, and I knocked, and she's like, "Just put it under the door." And I'm like, gosh, okay, this is so mysterious. So I slipped it underneath the door.
She's 6 or 7, I think.
Yeah, she was in first grade.
Yeah.
So she's like, 6. And then I hear her in there like wrestling, and then all of a sudden it got really quiet. And I thought, oh gosh, curiosity is killing me here. I really want to see. So I open the door and I peek in, and there she is she's got curly hair with her little curls just dangling. She's kneeling in front of this prayer box, and just one of the most beautiful moments of faith I've ever experienced. Wow. And I remember looking at her and saying, I want that. Whatever that is, I want that. And I'll never forget it. I felt goodness in that moment. But, life happens and you get caught up in the daily stuff. So just as quickly as it came, it left for me. But in our marriage, moving forward, what was starting to happen was, my truth of my experiences, I started to realize, molestation is bad, rape is bad, abuse is bad, where before I never had conscious thoughts about it. And so I started to feel an interior chaos and turmoil. And, I was pregnant with our 2 youngest boys kind of back to back. And so I was very busy trying to be a mom and raise our children. And he was working a lot and just going through the daily life of having a young family where I felt this chaos, but I didn't have time to deal with it. And it really sent me into a really bad place. And he was like, well, maybe you should get therapy. And that began my 7 years of therapy. So I went to a few different therapists and trying to calm this chaos inside that I felt, and started to realize that, I needed help. These things were bad. I needed to work through them. I needed to acknowledge them. And I did everything that the secular world told me to do, because that was my guide. Yeah. My guide was, I feel this way, what do I do? Oh, you take this pill or you go talk to this person. And so that's what I was doing. And I was constantly being fed that, that peace that you're looking for, that power is within you. And so you just need to tap into it. And so years into, after therapy, I ended up learning about kind of Eastern spirituality, Buddhism, and I ended up going to meditate at this lake in Pacific Palisades at this self-realization temple. And that is where, at that point in my life, now we're years in, right? That's where I thought I'd find my peace. So I was meditating at that lake, really trying to calm this craziness inside of me. And I'd never been in the actual temple before. And the gold on the top of it was blaring at me. And I was like, I've never been in there. Curiosity again drew me in there. And it's shaped like a hexagon or an octagon. And there's these big, huge tapestries on the back wall, maybe 8-10 feet tall, and of their avatars of who they worshiped. And right in the center was Jesus. And I remember when I first walked in and saw it, I was like, wait, you're here?
What are you doing here?
Hey, what are you doing here? And then the moment after I had that thought, like a hologram, he came out of this tapestry. And I felt just this, it was such a fullness of love and peace and truth. And I just fell to my knees. And he looked at me and said, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And then he said, I see you've met my friends. He's like, but you're searching for me. I'm who you're looking for. And gone. And I was just, at first I thought I was going crazy. And then that I pushed out of my head. But that was the moment that I realized that I needed Jesus Christ in my life.
Did you have the realization then that our Lord was a bit distinct from all this other stuff in that octagonal building?
Oh, yes.
So you knew that this was...
That truth was embedded in me instantly. And the first thing I thought was, wait a minute, my husband is always saying that they have Jesus in his church. And so I'm tearing down the street. Like, this is how much fervor I have in me to find Jesus Christ. I'm tearing down the street. I go home. I pull off all my Eastern religious symbols immediately, off my wall.
We had that avatar tapestry in our bedroom.
Yeah,
Marcus.
and I didn't even notice Jesus.
Whoa.
We did.
Whoa. You sit over there for a little bit. Where are you in all of this?
Absolutely. Great question. Great question.
Patient.
Well, patient, but also some level of ignorance. I don't know which was greater, probably a 60-40 on the ignorant, and the other part was the patient. No, we were, again, I mentioned that over the course of these years, I had this cultural Catholicism, then kind of faded, had some ultimatums that I didn't know where they came from, Catholic school and do this. And then the grace of the sacrament of marriage began to kind of slowly open my eyes. Well, it was a slow process. In that initial period, there was even this kind of sense of syncretism, right? We had and this is very Southern California, a lot of different inputs. She was going to this self-realization temple. I was taking the kids occasionally to Mass. We were having very different religious things. So my having this avatar thing in our bedroom was in a way...
a unifying thing.
It was kind of a unifier.
Yeah.
But it had, Paramahansa Yogananda and Gandhi and Jesus and and they were all there. And literally she came back from this experience and took that immediately off the wall. I said, what's going on? She's like, no, we're not having that. And so for me, again, I was very, I'm great. I'm fine with that. But I didn't really understand the fervor that was, about to sort of ignite in our lives. But really, she kicked it off. She kicked off my reversion by her quest to become closer to Christ, and her, frankly, and of course I love her, but her incessant asking me of questions, which I could not answer for the life of me.
Yeah.
I could not answer these questions.
Yeah, I came home and basically said, we're going to Mass. I want to see Jesus in your church. I've heard from your mom and your family and everybody else. You're always saying, oh, we receive Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. Jesus is in our church. Every time we drive by, cross yourself. Jesus is in there. So, of course, in my mind, it's like, I want Jesus. So you now have to take me to go meet Jesus. And so we started going to Mass, still not regularly, but we started going to Mass, and my eyes of curiosity were wide open. Why is he wearing a green cape? What's the smoke? Can I have the cookie? It was like, in all of these questions, why do they do this? And why is that up there? And who's this person? I was like, I was a child in a sponge, just learning things. I knew what I was looking for, and it was Jesus.
And of course, pointing out to me all along the things I'd taken for granted entirely that I'd never even seen. I think you may have been the first person to ask me what a deacon was. I mean, I couldn't answer those questions. And of course, for me, I'm very competitive, Marcus, very competitive. And so I felt challenged to explain things to her in a way. And of course, I had to go find this information. This was right around, I want to say 2004. It was right around the time the Passion of the Christ, the movie came out, which was also very meaningful to us. And my brother, who I haven't mentioned yet, is 2 years older. He and I were very close always. He also had been going around the same time through this sort of Eastern thing, very Buddhist kind of meditation, all this other stuff. but had in a meditation session right around the same time, had a radical encounter with Christ right around the same time during a meditation. And then he also discovered the Catholic mystics, Meister Eckhart, and he so he began to also in a way teach us and bring us together. And as a younger brother, you always follow in your brother's footsteps. So all of this was coordinated, obviously by the Holy Spirit, and it reminds me all the time of the famous story that's attributed to Saint Padre Pio of him sitting at his grandmother's feet while she's doing sewing and cross stitching, and him looking up and it looks a mess, but when he stood up and saw it from a different perspective, he could see the beauty that his grandmother had made. That image always resonates so much to me because that was our life. Wow. And all of this synchronicity being brought together, my brother, her conversion, the avatars, all of this stuff, and kind of leading us down the path, but our ability to see it simply by benefit of the sacramental graces we had received.
Wow.
Yeah, and it wasn't immediate. It was years before I converted. It was another good 3 to 4 years. And I didn't convert because I believed everything. I was truly looking for Jesus Christ. And we were now starting to attend Mass regularly, but because his brother was the choir director. And so we would go to show the children their uncle in the choir loft, as that God pulls us in one way or another. And then I was asked to fill in for a teacher in the Sunday school class, the kindergarten class. The director of religious education came and said, hey, I see you in hospitality after church and you're really good with the kids and you have 2 young ones. Our teacher is pregnant. She's going on maternity leave. Will you teach this class for me? And I told her, I said, you realize I'm not Catholic. And she said, oh, no, but do you believe in God? And I said, well, yeah, I believe in God. And she said, well, do you love Jesus? And I said, oh, I absolutely love Jesus. She's like, well, that's fine. They're kindergartners. And so I said, okay. So, of course, I go home and I think, what do Catholic kindergartners, what are they supposed to learn? So I started Googling it and researching it and started learning myself what I wanted to teach the kids. And so that's, milk, right? Before meat. So it's like God feeding me all these small truths at this lower level to kind of introduce his church to me. And then eventually she came up to me one day and she said, why aren't you Catholic? And I said, nobody had ever asked me that.
Not even your husband.
And I said, no. And she was like, I don't know. She's like, you should become Catholic. She's like, you're more Catholic than a lot of Catholics I know. That's what she said. And I was like, well, let me think about that. And I went home and I prayed about it. And I thought, God, is this where you're calling me to? And then it hit me that my husband was Catholic. My kids were Catholic. And that unity in family I didn't have growing up. And God used that for good to bring me into his church. I said, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to be Catholic. I didn't agree. My biggest objections were no confession. I'm not telling any man any of my sins. And you guys love Mary too much. It's too much for me. I have a mother wound, so that was very difficult for me to understand. And so when I spoke to the director of religious education and my sponsor about having apprehensions about coming in and I was honest with how I felt, she said, do you love Jesus? And I said, I absolutely do. She said, then you need to trust him, that he's leading you where you belong. Just keep searching for him and trust him. And so I said, yeah, I'll become a Catholic. And then I went in for my first confession, which I did not believe in. I went against my will, but knowing I had to do it in order to continue with the process. And I went into the confessional and closed the door. I knew exactly what to do at what time. And it was probably the oldest priest in the archdiocese behind the screen. And I couldn't hear a word he said. I'm a little bit deaf in this ear from previous relationships. And I can only hear the sound. I'm like this at the screen, like, what? And I got frustrated. I got really aggravated. And I started to see, I knew this was wrong. I knew I shouldn't be in here. I knew this was a waste of my time. And I had a hardness of heart. And he finished, and when he got quiet, I said, oh, this is my time to say. So I said my sins, and then I knew that I had to wait, because my sponsor said when he raises his hand, That is when God is forgiving you. And so you do the sign of the cross and know that your sins are forgiven. So I knew that part. I was waiting for that part. And there it was. His hand went up and I was like, oh, this is it. I'm almost done. I'm almost out of here. And he raised his hand up to give me absolution. And when I put my hand on my head, everything that he had said, I knew. Everything that he shared, everything in that confession was truth in my heart. I knew the whole conversation. I knew the advice he had given me after I said my sins. And that was God turning my stony heart to flesh in that moment. And just hit me with his truth and love yet again. And I bolted out of there. I mean, there was a line and I was like, you have got to go in there. This is the most amazing thing in your life. Trust me. My sponsor's like, no, come here. Come here. I was so excited. And that began my truth, my truth and having the truth of the Catholic Church really be infused in me. I knew it was true and I knew I had to just trust and be obedient.
All this time, of course, when she's having these incredible moments of grace and being touched in her heart, I'm in the background trying to intellectually solve these riddles as she's then coming and explaining to me what is confession and all of that. And I'm going, Marcus, to Journey Home and to different sources that I'm coming across for the first time, Catholic.com, Catholic Answers, which, God and his extraordinary...
You told me you were putting Journey Home on just to put your kids to sleep.
I was. Absolutely. This show and the Coming Home Network have been a great blessing to us for years and years, but in ways perhaps most people don't know. But I was trying to solve these things and learn about them, and in the process came across the Church Fathers and came across the deep history and found that pearl of great price. And in God's amazing sense of humor, now here years later, I'm actually associated with some of these organizations. I'm, the vice chair of the board of trustees of Catholic Answers. I don't know how I got to be that, but all of these great sources helped me from here turn this on. And God kind of went in the other direction with her, activated her heart eventually. But I was learning about my faith, which I'd never really understood, and was going through all of this that I did. And very soon thereafter, actually discerned a call to the diaconate, which we prepared for together. And, but it's been an incredible journey.
You do have a book, which I want to mention it, Dazzled, Finding the Key to Perfect Forgiveness, which is Patty McGuire Armstrong is a co-writer, or
Correct.
Yes.
So I just want to mention that to the audience. But I want to make sure that the time is still allowable. But you talked an awful lot about finding not only your way into the church, marriage in the church, commitment in the church, a return to deal with the very issues. How did that progress? The poor, the homeless. That it wasn't just something in your past, but it's something you're.
Yeah.
Right. Well, for me, it's the sacrament of confession has been a true blessing in my life. In 2011, we were going to confession as a family, and I was kneeling in front of the tabernacle, and I couldn't think of any sins. Couldn't think of anything I'd done to offend God that week, right? How crazy is that? And I prayed, I said, I know that's just not true, Lord. Please reveal to me how I have offended you so that I can make it right with you. And as soon as I was done praying that, the word abortion came into my heart. And it was crazy because 2008, I converted, and this was 2011. And the thought I had was, how could I have gone to confession for 3 years and not ever thought about that? It's those wounds, that promise I made to myself that this never happened. And then asking God to truly reveal, and him revealing that for me. And I was scared. I didn't know if I could get excommunicated. I didn't know if the priest was going to yell at me. I didn't know. So I was scared to go in, and I went in and had a beautiful confession. And that priest at the end of it said, look, God has forgiven you, but you may find it difficult to forgive yourself in your journey moving forward. And if so, here's a card for Rachel's Vineyard retreats. And 4 months later, I'm in a Rachel's Vineyard retreat, being introduced spiritually to my aborted daughter, Esperanza. And so at that retreat, I was able to claim the motherhood of my aborted child and give her life meaning and purpose and acknowledgement. And my husband spiritually adopted her to give her a last name, Jess Echeverry. And we told all of her siblings, all of our other children about her. And she is a very active prayer warrior for
Absolutely.
us, intercessor for us and our family. And in doing that, again, the graces that came, I started homeschooling our children, and we were at this homeschool conference, and there was confession in the back. I said, I'm going to go to confession. And I knelt down, and I felt like I'd done everything the world told me to do in order to find that peace, and now I'm in the church. And I expressed, I hate those people. I hate the man who raped me, the man who molested me, the men who put me in the hospital, the men who abused me and just treated me so terribly and traumatized me. And I can't get past that. And the priest looked at me and he said, do you love them? And at first inside, I'm like, what is wrong?
You want to punch the priest.
I wanted to punch him in the face. But I looked into his eyes and saw that same truth and love that I had experienced with Jesus before. And I knew that I was speaking to Jesus, and I knew it was Jesus asking me that question. And I said, no, Father, I don't. He backed it up with, do you want to see them in heaven? And I just sat back and was like, no. But I knew in my heart that my answer was supposed to be yes. I knew that was what it was supposed to be. And I said, Father, how do I do that? How do I get to that point where I love them and I want to see them in heaven? And he looked at me and he said, you simply pray. You simply pray. It's God's work to do in you. And at first I was like, oh gosh, pray. Like, give me something more tangible, please, that I could like check a box and
100
do.
push-ups.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, we in our lowest moments, we tend to think that prayer is just not as powerful as it truly is. And I said, okay. And that began my years-long journey. I was going to daily mass. I would receive communion. I would kneel down and I would say, Lord, you know why I'm here, and pray. And then 3 years later, I did that. And in my heart, I felt sorrow. I felt sorrow for them if something bad had happened to them, if they didn't make it in heaven, and God had done it. He had turned my heart towards them, and I felt this love for them, and I did love them, and I did want to see them in heaven. And that is where finding the key to perfect forgiveness. The scripture says, you are to be perfect like your Father is perfect in heaven, right? Are we? No. Should we strive for that? Yes. And God showed me that there is perfect forgiveness. It's the next step after what the world tells us to stop at. It's that last little portion of the pie where God says, no, come further. I can take you there. That is perfect forgiveness, which he allowed me to experience.
Wow. A website, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
How do you, what was it? Momoletics?
Momoletics.
Momoma.
Like homiletics, yeah.
Yes, like homiletics, but it's from the mom. The deacon has his and the
I have
mom
homilies.
has hers.
She has momilies.
Yes.
But momoletics.com is where you can find most of our information.
Yes.
And for me, it's deaconcharlie.com.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, our stories are intertwined.
Let's say someone's watching now,
Mm-hmm.
flipped on the TV, and is caught up in a bit of what you were in.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's someone who's watching whose child is caught up in that.
Of course.
What do you want to say to them? Got about a minute.
Yeah.
Where should they turn?
Where should they turn? They should turn to God, first and foremost, in prayer. The priest in that confession told me that that's our most powerful thing that we can do when we live our faith. Prayer is our relationship with God, and God is the one who changes hearts from stone, to flesh. He's the one who does that work. We just have to be obedient to him and cooperate with him and have patience. Our journey took decades, decades, and just never lose hope. I don't think it's a coincidence that my boarded daughter's name is Esperanza, which means hope in Spanish. I never felt like I was filled with hope ever in my life until I met my husband, until I converted, until I realized her life was valid. So never lose hope.
All right. Your witness, as well as together, your experience of the Holy Spirit in your life screams that that witness in our ear that says, God doesn't do this.
Mm.
Yeah.
He does.
He does.
He does.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so prayer is asking God, please help me out of the midst of this. If I'm in the midst of this, help me at least know you're here. And he can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you just witness that to our folk watching. Thank you
Amen.
both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Marcus.
Giving
God
that
bless you. Thank you very
witness.
much.
Thank you.
And your book, Dazzled, which can be found on the EWTN Religious Catalog, if you're interested in that. And God bless you in your work as a deacon.
Thank you.
Friend.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. I'm going to say two things. Number one, I hope that this program is an encouragement to you. But I also hope that this program is an encouragement in you to pray, especially if you have someone in your life that feels impotent to break free from the problems. Pray and ask that the Lord would break through and help them know that there's a Lord Jesus Christ that wants to have a relationship with them through the church, through her sacraments. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. See you next week.